Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Go to www.maxoutmindset.com.
You are listening to Max Out Mindset with your host, Dr. Larry Widman, performance psychiatrist and elite mindset coach to women in sports, business, and life.
Welcome to the Max Out Mindset podcast. This is your host, Dr. Larry Widman, sometimes known as Doc in the mindset world. I love doing this podcast because I've been blessed over the last couple decades to work with some of the best coaches, athletes, leaders, and teams. And when I do this podcast, I like to share what I've learned from other people and what I've shared with teams. And then when we have a guest on, to learn mostly from them. My definition of maxing out is given the talent and the experience of the athletes and coaches, the depth, the health, and the intangibles. Can an individual or a team reach the limits of their capabilities? And then can they do it under pressure? Because I always say, if you can't do it when it matters, what's the point? Today, we're doing a podcast for the first time where Coach Jess from Max Out Mindset, Coach Jess Connect, is going to be doing it with me. She's done some of her own awesome podcasts with some really cool, high-performing athletes and coaches here the last couple of months. Welcome, Coach Jess. It's going to take me a minute to tell you who this person is. And so we're going to learn about her story. I can't tell you all her accolades already, although she's only a sophomore in college. But I want you to listen to this. She is a college softball player currently at the University of Oklahoma, in high school at Papio La Vista High School. Her senior year, I'm not going to believe this, she was 27-0 as a pitcher. Her ERA was 0.10. You got that right, 0.10. She gave up 27 hits the entire year, 15 walks, and 137 innings of pitching. And he had 316 strikeouts. And then on offense, pitchers aren't supposed to be that great on offense, at least that's what I was told. Hit 510, had 20 home runs. So her teams won 3 or 4 high school state championships during that time period. She was named the National Gatorade Player of the Year in 2020/2021. There's a ton of other awards there, but then as the number 1 recruit in the country with a lot of pressure and expectations, this is all she did at Oklahoma. In her freshman year, she was 22-1. She had a more human ERA, although it's not human, of 1.09, and a perfect game. We're going to talk about a time period where she was injured, but recovered enough to be the starting pitcher in the championship game of the World Series, where Oklahoma won a national championship. She was a National Freshman Player of the Year. Welcome to the Max Out Mindset podcast, Jordy Bahl.
Hi, Doc. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to chat with you today. And so you heard my definition of maxing out, Jordy. Can you put into words for us how you define maxing out?
When I think maxing out, at least physically, I think of finding your limit. So in the weight room, when you max out, it is seeing how much weight you can put on the bar and move. But when it comes to the mind game and mentally maxing out, it's how much pressure can you handle in a certain situation, and how much can you maximize your mindset to help you on the field.
What we're really talking about is commitment here, right? We're talking about putting in all the work physically, all the work mentally, so that what I call, we have a foundation for the other ingredients that we're going to talk about as we get into this, of confidence and composure and concentration. We got to have a foundation. It starts with commitment and working as hard as you can, physically and mentally. For those who don't know you, could you just give us a little bit of a background of, where you're from and what life was like for you leading up to you coming to the University of Oklahoma?
Yeah, so I'm from Papillion, Nebraska. I've always been a big homebody, and I was always best friends with my brothers growing up. So I'm really close with all of them, and pretty much have been competing with them since day one. So a lot of my competitiveness I attribute to them. But growing up, my parents supported me a lot when it came to sports, and they gave me a lot of opportunities. And I just tried to make the most of all those opportunities that they gave me. And ultimately that led to me wanting to play college softball. And so Oklahoma was always a dream school. And so being able to have that opportunity to come play there was unreal.
Talk about that transition for us, just between being a superstar in high school. Obviously, I read your accolades. They're probably unmatched in this country, but then, those go away. Like anytime you go up another level, you start over. What was the transition like from you from Papillion as a high school and club star to going to a team that's loaded with talent at a next level?
Honestly, the accolades were never anything I put a lot of focus or a lot of concentration on. I tried to never let that be the motivating factor. So going to school where, like you said, none of that matters anymore, it didn't really change my mindset and how I wanted to approach the game any differently. I just wanted to go out, compete, work as a team, and do the best that we can and see what happens. But definitely I just went in my freshman year pretty hungry, I guess. And the transition more so was just like, okay, you're really on your own now. So are you going to hold yourself accountable?
That's something a lot of people don't think about, which is there comes a point where it becomes all about you and what you're going to do, right? When nobody's watching, so to speak, right? So
that's true. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Coach Jess, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So Jordy, as you know, here at Max Out Mindset, we train the 4 C's of elite mindset. Doc just asked you about commitment, which is the first C, right? And the second one is confidence. Third is concentration. And fourth is composure. And so we train a lot of teams and individual athletes, and confidence seems to be one of the biggest struggles. And so I was just very curious, were you just born with confidence? Did you have to work at it? How did you build that up? I mean, you were a superstar coming out of Nebraska, right? You chose Oklahoma. I think confidence is something every athlete wants. And I think we're just curious, how did you own it? And then what did you do when you struggled the most? What were some key strategies that you had?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people sometimes will look for confidence from the wrong things. And it's not the success that gives you confidence. Ultimately, like, you do have success and that helps, but you don't just have success and automatically have confidence. Like, there's a whole process of getting to the success. And honestly, I think it's getting beat and getting like punched in the mouth per se, and how you respond to that. That is where you build the confidence. I think that growing up, being from Nebraska and playing on a Nebraska travel softball team during the summer, we got to go to really cool places around the country and play high-level teams from the so-called softball states in the country. And so getting to compete against those teams and having good experiences and bad experiences against them is what helped me to build confidence on the mound. So kind of just from being the underdog is, I would say, where I got a lot of confidence. And then kind of just the same thing when you go to college, you're a freshman, you're the underdog, you got to fight. You're not going to have success all the time, but it's all how you respond to that.
I'm going to dig a little bit deeper.
Okay.
Sometimes athletes today, I'm going to do just enough work where it feels comfortable. But when it gets uncomfortable, that's too much. How did you continually push yourself, right? I don't think anybody loves losing, but how did you continue, right? When the going got tough, right? And you were battling, whether it be mentally, physically, what made you keep going? What made you choose to focus on that end goal, or how did you overcome in fighting that comfortability?
I honestly think it's just the will to not quit. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be times where you don't want to go put in the extra work, or you don't want to get back up after maybe a embarrassing outing, you could say. But it's like, what's your other option? Like, you could sit there and not do anything about it, or you could say, okay, come back in a couple months and let's see what happens this time again. So it's like, I don't know. My family never really let me quit. My parents never really let me quit. And I say quit as in like, oh, I hate softball, I don't want to play anymore, but quit as in like, you're not going to sulk too long in your failures. You're going to do something about it. And then next time when that test comes, see what the outcome is.
That's good stuff, isn't it, Coach Jess? So, I mean, because every athlete has to face those battles at some point where we're tired, we're sore, there's doubt that creeps in, we get burned out a little bit or frustrated. Can you think of an example either in that club period? Because, by the way, I completely forgot to mention she won a national championship at Nebraska Gold and had high level success at Nebraska Thunder. So she did mention she was playing these club games at the highest level as well. But can you think of a time either then or at Oklahoma where you actually had something that caused you to have a little break in your confidence? And then what did you do about it?
Yeah. So I guess a club example is I remember this one outing specifically where I gave up 17 runs in one inning. So I've had a lot of experiences like that where it's just you get hit around.
Some of us would be really shocked to hear that you gave up 17 runs in an inning, right? But you've had, like you said, experiences like that. Talk to us about when you've been punched in the mouth like that example or others. How did you get your confidence back?
You just have to keep going. You just have to show up the next day and keep throwing. And honestly, I think it's that way in life as well. It's like there's going to be downfalls. There's going to be times when maybe something falls through that's totally unexpected and it just puts you behind. But you have no choice but to show up and start working the next day to get back to where you were to make up for that loss. So just the mindset that you can't quit. You just have to show up and the next day and do it again.
How much of that is natural wiring of yours, and how much of that have you had to learn?
I think a lot of it's just learned. But I don't know, maybe some of it's natural, but I just feel like it's the way that my parents raised us. But also just like me and my brothers, like, oh, you're going to quit because you had one bad outing. It's like, I also am a firm believer that good outings and bad outings don't define you.
Question: when we talk about the ingredients of confidence, our number one ingredient is preparation and hard work. And based on what I understand of you and what you've shared with us already, your number one ingredient of confidence, I'm guessing you're attacking pretty hard: the physical, the mental, the technical, and the tactical aspects of your sport. So the number two ingredient that causes high performing female athletes to struggle with their confidence is what we call self-talk. So I'm really curious as to whether, if there's ever been a time where you've struggled with your self-talk, if so, what has it been like, and then what have you done about it?
Yeah, so I think the hardest time I've ever had with my self-talk has actually been this year so far, and it started this fall. I came down to school in the fall, and I just didn't feel like myself the entire time, and sometimes I still struggle. But the entire fall, we were doing inner squads with our team. So every single day at practice, I'm quite literally going up against the best hitters in the country. And amidst all of this, I just can't find that fire. Like I feel like I play with a fire and it's always just come to me. And I've always been very emotionally driven on the field. And that's where I can kick into the next gears when the emotions start taking over. But I just had a total lack of emotion. And so trying to compete at that high level every day to where I can go against my own teammates who are the best hitters in the country, but not feeling like myself at the entire time and constantly trying to search for that fire in that next gear that I can't kick it into. That was one of the hardest things to start to overcome. And so that entire time I'm like, man, I'm just not competitive anymore. Like, why am I not competitive? And I'm letting all these thoughts spiral through my head. And the more that they would spiral through my head, the more I would start to psych myself out. And then when that started to happen, now I'm not feeling like I'm prepared when I go into the game, and I am feeling a sense of doubt. And so what started to happen is now I'm holding on way too tight and I'm not playing free whatsoever. I'm like, in a sense, playing scared. And honestly, trying to get out of that has been so tough, but it just comes back to one, being able to trust my training and knowing that every day I show up, I'm still giving it everything I have. And so that's all anyone can ever ask for yourself. And so if you're giving it everything you have, what more can you ask for? So just remembering that helps me to kind of take a deep breath and be like, okay, I'm doing my best. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm doing my best. I can't ask for anything more. But then on top of just trusting your training is realizing that this is still just a game. And I'm putting a lot more pressure on myself than there actually needs to be. So I think just a big takeaway from that is how fast that self-talk can spiral in a good or bad direction.
Can you put into words for us, and I know Coach Jess is going to take a deeper dive in this, but can you put into words for us some common kind of self-talk statements that you would say to yourself that were negative, and then would you replace them, or would you just remind yourself that you've earned the right to be confident, or what was your strategy when you went negative? What were you saying when you went negative, and then how did you get out of it?
When I would go negative, it was just a total lack of trust. And like I said, I would just say to myself, I'm like, you're not competitive right now. Like, you're not competitive. You're not good enough. Things of that kind of nature. And so the first thing is you have to acknowledge that you're saying that to yourself. And then usually I would try to replace it with, you know what you're doing. You've played this game since you were 8 years old. Like, relax. It's not that big of a deal. Like I said, like, you've put in the work, you're ready to go. And almost just like, whether I believed it or not, trying to convince myself that I was fully capable of having success in that moment, whether I actually felt like it or not. But before you're going to actually believe it, you have to replace those negative thoughts with what you want to actually be feeling.
Yeah. Now you're giving us some real gems, right? Because I always say, you said acknowledge. I love that word. I call it awareness and strategy, Jordy, that the best in the world like you, and this is what really helps the high school and college athletes so much, is they don't think you struggle, right? They think you've got it all figured out. And I tell them every day, the best in the world like Jordy Bahl struggle, but they acknowledge it or have awareness that those words aren't helping me, and a strategy to replace them. And you remind yourself with the words that I've been here before. It's not that big of a deal. I put in the work. And so you give yourself confidence reminders. And that's what I think is so important for athletes to hear, is that everybody struggles with their self-talk at times, but what do you do about it? You got to be aware about it first, or acknowledge it and then replace it. So I love those messages. Coach Jess, thoughts?
Yeah, Jordy, I really like that you kind of gave us a little bit more vulnerability, when it comes to self-talk and your struggle. I do have a couple questions for you though. When did you actually buy in to your self-talk? We serve a lot of athletes who are like, okay, self-talk is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm supposed to be positive, but they are kind of 50% in. Like, how can you choose to fully believe your positive power statements or your self-talk, right? Because I think any athlete at any moment can be like, yeah, I kind of believe it today, but I don't believe it tomorrow. So tell me why and how you choose to buy into it 100%, especially that self-talk when you struggle. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, that is a really good question. That is the $1 million question. Honestly, for me, it comes down so much to my faith. And a big step for me in being able to actually buy into my positive self-talk is acknowledging the fact that the negative self-talk you hear in your head is not really your own voice. It is another voice. It's a completely different voice than your own voice. And whether you want to call that the bad angel on your shoulder, or you want to call it evil, like, whatever you want to call it, whatever your beliefs are, acknowledging that that's not you, that kind of lit a competitive fire in me. And that's when I was like, okay, you're not going to win. You're not going to win this battle. Like, you might say I'm all these things. You might say I'm not good enough. You might say I'm not ready. You might say I'm scared, all these things, but that's not what God says, or that's not what my training says, or that's not what all the hard work you've put in says. That's not what your coaches say, your teammates say. I don't know, whatever they say, but you just have to know that the negative is not you.
And I like that you called that out. We had Nora Sis on our podcast. She's an outside hitter for Creighton University volleyball, and had a very similar thing when she struggled, right? She really leaned on something higher than herself, and that was her faith, very similar. It's so cool, because I think for you as a competitive athlete you are, in order to know when you know it's not you, you had to be really mindful to know exactly who you are. So that's my next question for you is, when did you start to take time to know who you are, even your training, to your competition, to how you do under pressure? When did you decide to take yourself seriously and give time and space to know exactly who you are? So when the lies, enemy, bad angel, as you reference, start to creep in, you know how to self-correct that. Tell us how you started to get to know yourself and what you were really awesome and confident and good at.
Well, one thing I would say is diving into the word, because in my faith, it's like God knows who I am. He knows exactly who I am. So I'm going to listen to what he has to say and not what the enemy has to say. But also combat that bad voice in your head with, where's the evidence? Okay. And the evidence might say, well, what about that last pitch you threw? But you can go back in your mind and be like, but what about all those other great pitches that I threw? Like, they're still in there, like I know how to throw those ones too, because I have before. So let me just go back and try to grab those ones and not hold on to all the negative ones, because for every one bad pitch you have a lot that you can go back on that were really good too. So it's kind of just picking which you want to grab from.
Doc, what do you think about that? It's kind of like our self-talk. You have 3 negatives to 1 positive, but the elite switch it and go 3 positives to 1 negative.
Yeah, and what she's also talking about is past success, right? She's talking about past success, meaning I can reflect back on when I've been positive, things that have gone well. So it's just, Jordy, what we talk about with our ingredients of confidence is that we can see why you're able to get it back is 1, you put in the work. 2, when your self-talk struggles, you have this way of looking at it, either spiritually or own thinking about the reasons why you've earned the right to be confident. That combination has helped you. Our 4th ingredient of confidence is past success, meaning even if you've recently struggled, you can rely on your brain to remind yourself why you've earned the right to be confident. Or I'm curious as to whether you use any of these techniques, because some of our really high-level athletes either use a highlight reel of themselves or they visualize best plays or the way they want to pitch or execute a skill, either in preparation for a performance or when they've struggled to try to remind themselves why they've earned the right to be confident. Do you use any of those strategies?
Yeah, visualization is a big one for me. And it's funny because it's like whenever I go back and watch film of myself throwing, I hardly ever watch film on times where things went bad or I didn't feel good, which I could definitely probably benefit from going back and learning from those moments again. But it's like I lived it. I don't want to go back there. So I like to watch the times where I had success, because watching the film, I can go back and remember exactly how that feels like. And I just want to let it sit there in my mind and let it kind of get ingrained and become so familiar with that feeling, because it will be easier to replicate again in the future.
Yeah, that's just a great answer, right? Because we are trying to explain to people the mechanics of confidence and where does it come from. And you're starting to articulate why you have this ability to get it back when it goes low. There's a couple other ingredients. So I'm really curious, and we'll get Jess's take on this too, but we both believe that even the best self-talkers, as you pointed out, sometimes will struggle, but because you're on a team, you're not playing tennis in isolation, that there are times where your teammates and coaches can either help you or hurt your confidence. And they can really help your confidence if they know what you need from them and you're willing to let them into your brain when you do need them. Do your teammates and coaches play a role for you at all in what I call that 3rd ingredient of confidence, helping you in those moments of stress so that you can move on to the next moment?
Yeah. Like you said, you kind of have to be vulnerable to do that. So you have to be vulnerable with your teammates and you have to be vulnerable with your coaches. And I think that building that trust kind of comes over time. But whenever I've opened up to my teammates about things I might be struggling with, and they might not even be softball related at all, but everything kind of correlates and they can have a trickle effect and bleed into each other. But letting my pitching coach, Coach Rocha, know what's going on, letting my teammates know what's going on, they can kind of read certain things and know when to come up to me and be like, hey, got your back. Like, hey, we're right here for you. Just, hey, go compete. We got you. And I think just knowing that they have your back, like you don't feel so alone and you don't feel like you're on an island. And yeah, it just plays an incredible role. And I think that's one of the best parts about being on a team and playing a team sport is that you're not in it alone.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy, Jess, when we've listened to some of our volleyball elites, Justine Wong, Arantes, Jordan Thompson, it's crazy because their words are almost identical. They never let you sit in a funk. They never let you feel like you have to do it all alone. Some of Justine's classic words she's told us, Jordan Thompson, I lean on my teammates and they help me believe. And when I know they believe in me, I believe in myself. And so it's so amazing that the best volleyball players that we work with, and then obviously one of the best softball players in the world, is telling us the exact same messages about the impact of her team or her coaches. And Jess, I'm sure you'll have a take on this. So I'll let you dive into that. But man, she mentioned that some of her best growth has taken place when she shared things about herself that may not even be softball related to her team. And that really helped the team help her.
Well, Jordy, the question goes back to you. Is vulnerability a strength or a weakness?
It's definitely a strength. That is something that I've had to learn, because I think maybe 1 or 2 years ago, my answer might be different. But it's been a process of just learning that you need to be strong to be vulnerable.
Repeat that again, Jordy.
You need to be strong to be vulnerable.
Okay, I had to do that on purpose because a lot of the world, as athletes, think that vulnerability is a weakness or vulnerability isn't a strength. And so I'm just curious if you can unpack that. How can you say that? Why do you believe that with everything in your heart? Like, I feel like that answer was authentic. How could you say that? Tell us why. How'd you get to that conclusion?
Oh, man. Okay. So, like I kind of said, this fall was a really rough time for me, and honestly, probably one of the lowest points I've ever been at. And like I said, that voice that you have in your head that's not you, the last thing it wants you to do is to shine a light on it and be like, I know you're there. I know what you are. And we're going to squash it and get rid of it. And I'm going to bring these people with me to help me silence you. But if you just sit there quietly and you don't say anything, it's just going to get louder and louder, and you're going to give it more power. And so taking the step of asking for help and admitting that there was a voice there is the first step to squashing it. And if you don't take that step, you're never going to squash it. So building up the courage to just take that step was really the first step in me gaining my confidence, my energy, my spark back, and honestly, just myself.
You made a really powerful decision, right? And that's the power of choice we talk about at Max Out Mindset, but you asked for help and you knew that this was bigger than yourself, whether that would be teammates, coaches, supporting cast and crew there at the university. So Doc, I mean, you have had a lot of experience with teams and athletes as well. Do you agree vulnerability is a strength or a weakness?
Well, I have an entire chapter in my books called The Power of Vulnerability. So I think you know the answer to that. And Brené Brown and the vulnerability guru really has shaped my views on it. But, if you numb vulnerability, you numb all your good emotions too. And I always say there's no way you can build a great team that gets to ultimate trust without vulnerability. And the only way you can do that is to build deep relationships and get real with each other. And so, Jordy, I want you to take me back to something that happened last year, because I'm going to play a short clip. It is a video clip, but you'll just be able to hear the audio of it. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. But I understand that you had an injury that actually took you away from softball for a little bit during the season. Can you share with us what the injury was, what impact it had on you physically and mentally, and then talk about how you overcame it?
The injury was a stress fracture in my pitching arm, and it happened the very last game of our last series of conference. So literally right before postseason starts, which is the time of year that every athlete just dies for. So I was kind of just like in a state of shock at first. And the first week to a week and a half, I was so stress free. It was crazy. I was like, there's literally nothing I can do about this. My arm's broke. Like, I'm just like, what do I even have to worry about? Like, school's out. I wish I was playing, but I can't, and I can't do anything about it. And that sucks. But it was like after that, I think that first week or so of just like shock, like, wow, this is happening, where I started to be like, wow, this sucks. And so throughout that, when that started to happen, I was just trying to be the best teammate I could be. And my teammates were there for me too, and they knew that it was really hard. But if anything, like, they just rallied together, and they almost just took the mindset like, hey, you might not feel like you're with us, but you're with us. And that was my first time really ever being injured. So I wouldn't say I really had the best response to it, like emotionally. I was like, okay, so now I'm just sitting in the training room during practice, and I'm not out there with them. And I mean, even now talking about it, I'm just like, this is like, I don't really know what to do, but my teammates had my back. And when I started to make my way back in bullpens and started to throw, like, it was super painful. And so that was just hard on top of it. Like, not only was I not at my same athletic ability, but it was super painful the entire time. And so that just stressed me out even more. And just finally being able to go out there and compete in the World Series that last game, like, I think one of the coolest things was we'll go back and watch that game as a team, and just the unreal plays that my teammates were making. I'm like, how is that physically, humanly possible? Some of the stuff they were doing. And I just never felt more like, wow, they have my back than when I was out there in that moment in the circle. Like, literally every pitcher's dream, the stuff that they were doing. But it goes off the field. It goes into the locker room. It goes back in Norman, not even in Oklahoma City, where they just had my back and I could lean on them the entire time. And it just, like I said, it bleeds together. Like, it was off the field and then it was on the field. And it was so evident when it was on the field because everyone could see it, everyone that was watching. But what no one saw was how they were there for me when, like, the cameras were off.
It tells us so much. I always say that you have to have enough talent to compete or win championships. But it's never the talent that defines the team that maxes out. It's what I call the non-technical aspects of your sport, meaning the building of the relationships, the trust, the communication, the role acceptance. All those things are what I call the non-technical aspects of softball, but those are the ones that determine whether a team is going to max out under pressure. So what I'm going to play for you, Jordy, is you being interviewed right after you won the national championship game. So I just want you to listen to your message because I'm sure you've heard this before, but I want you to comment on what you said and why.
Michaela Chester here with Jordy Bahl, Oklahoma national champions. Jordy, National Freshman of the Year, an amazing season. You return from injury, you get the start today, and you win the championship. Can you describe the journey and the moment?
I just want to give all the glory to God in that situation because 3 weeks ago, I couldn't throw 10 pitches in a bullpen, and every pitch that I could throw was like 50 miles an hour, and I was just trying to put over the plate. So just the fact that God allowed me to heal enough and quick enough to be up here and play tonight and have an impact is just absurd. And it's just like, not absurd, but it's like a miracle. It's like crazy. And I really there were a lot of up and downs, but I just said, God, it's in your control. Whatever happens, happens. But whatever happens, I'm giving you the glory. And so definitely giving the glory to him tonight.
Describe your emotions. How does this bring you to tears right now?
Just because of the miracle and just because of how hard this team has worked. And it started in the off season. It started during the summer. It started in the fall. And just we never took a day off. And to just see it pay off is just so rewarding.
How about that defense behind you? Oh, Jada Coleman, Robbie Coleman. I saw your emotions. What was that like?
Yeah, man, my teammates, they've always had my back, whether we're on the field or off the field. We all know what each other are going through. And that's just, it makes this so much stronger. What happens on the field so much stronger because of how much we care about each other. And yeah, they had my back tonight and made amazing plays. And that fires me up more than a strikeout every day. So.
All right, Jordy, what comment on what you heard there and what your thoughts are?
Wow. I can just hear in my voice, just I almost remember that feeling, and it's I felt like I was floating, like there was so much adrenaline and everything just spitting through, but just so real. I feel like everything I'm saying is just, it's just from the heart. And I do remember Jada Coleman's catch. I don't even know.
Yeah, a lot of emotion there, isn't it? Even now, isn't it? Why do you think you're so emotional listening to it several months later?
Oh man, I just think that every time I go back and either one, listen to that, or two, just as a team were watching that game from last year. I mean, this is totally kind of off topic from what we're talking about, but it's hard sometimes because I just think about how much different, like, I just think of everything that's happened since that moment. And that feels so long ago. I mean, part of me feels like a completely different person just because of what a challenge this year has been since then.
Can you put into words, as emotional as this is, like, why was it good to experience what you did this past fall? How did you come out of it better? Because I always like to ask people, when you've had an adversity, what did you learn from it, and what can you take from it positively?
I would just say when I listen to that interview, like, I hear so much talking about so many things besides winning a national championship, like giving God the glory in that moment, talking about my teammates and how awesome they are in that moment. And like, I don't really talk a lot about winning the national championship. And I think it's crazy because that's not really like what brings the joy. Like, the next day you wake up and it's like, hey, now what? We get up and do the same thing all over again. And so I think that's just such a important thing to notice, is that I feel like so many athletes maybe struggle because it's like you're constantly chasing that one thing. You're constantly chasing the national championship. And then once you get it, it's like you have this high and then you have this letdown because it's like, okay, well, that didn't really fill me up as much as I thought it would. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Boy, we've had so many coaches tell us the same thing, that they thought once they won the championship, it would change things for them in a different way than it did. And so I think it's not unusual at all for an athlete to chase something. And then, so the interesting thing I have, and I want to see what Coach Jess has to say about this, is that two things. One, when I show that video to people, one, I'm trying to show them about the sixth ingredient of confidence, the role of spirituality can play for some athletes. And I know it's important for you. We've talked about that, but I also show that to them to say, did Jordy mention one thing about softball and winning the national championship? What was her message? And you repeated it for us. It was about your relationship with God and your teammates, and the fact you had each other's backs and you knew about each other on and off the field, and celebrating your teammates. So what have you learned, right? You've now learned what most high performers learn, that the championship is really cool. Of course it is. You chase it, but it's more about the process than the outcome. But what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself that really does fill your bucket?
I found out that I need balance in my life. And sometimes we get so caught up and so consumed in our sport or in one thing that we lose all sense of balance. And I think that's when maybe we start to overanalyze or get so consumed in something that doesn't matter.
Wow.
We can lose all sense of perspective.
Yeah. Wow. See, nobody would guess this about you, Jordy, right? They would say, she just won it all. She's the National Freshman of the Year. She pitched the championship. Life is just always great for her, never. And then you're giving the reality of it, which so many other student athletes struggle with and face day to day, whether they win a championship or not, which is, how do they find this balance between faith, family, and friends? How do you not make softball or your sport part of your identity to the point where it consumes you? So just really crazy stuff. Coach Jess, what else to unpack on this one?
I mean, I'm over here loving this, Jordy. I know that you're feeling emotion, you're being vulnerable, you're in the midst of your struggle to victory. But if there's anything that we can offer right now, like, Jordy, you're exactly where you need to be. There is a testimony that's being birthed out of just the wisdom that you're sharing with us. But I think you're going through these hard moments because you're going to teach a lot of young athletes and even peers how to overcome what it means to be a really great softball player, an athlete, teammate, but there's also a really great leader and a really great human. And softball is something that you get to do. It's not everything that you do. And I think that's such a powerful message. If you could go back to your 13, 14, 15-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Honestly, I would say just keep those things in mind, because going through high school, it's like every kid in high school is just like, I'm so ready to be done with this. Like, I can't wait to go to college. I can't wait to start my own life. I can't wait for my freedom and for my independence. And I had some of that in me too. But it's like, don't forget about your foundation. Don't forget about all those things, because you're going to go away and then you're not going to have them, and you're going to be like maybe fine at first, but finally you're going to hit the point where it's like, okay, like this really isn't filling me up. like what am I doing? And it's because you lost sight of what your foundation is. You lost sight of what makes you full, I guess.
We have learned, Jordy, that if you had maybe said a couple of years ago, at least part of defining success would have been winning a national championship. When you have thrown that last ball in softball, whenever that is, what will success look like when your career is over? How will you know if it's been successful?
Honestly, if I'm living a life where I feel like I'm helping people, I hope that I'm a mom one day. So I just want to be the best mom I can be. I still want to wake up, whether I'm playing softball or not, wake up every day and feel like I'm accomplishing something or making a difference, making someone happy. That's just kind of going to be my goal, I think, my whole life. Best mother, daughter, wife one day, sister, whatever role I have, just be the best I can be.
Wow. That's what this journey teaches us if we learn to use it the right way. I think just sort of what Coach Jess was saying, that this is actually going to be a celebration one day, because what you've been learning through this struggle is who you want to be, right? You want to be the best mother, daughter, friend, bring happiness to people, help people. And you don't always know that when you're 18 years old and striking out every single person, or just because of the age that we're at. And you've learned through lots of success, through some hard times, you're starting to learn what real success looks like and how you define it. And the cool thing is you get to define what it looks like. Nobody else does for you. And that's why I love the journey of a student athlete, because there's highs and lows that most people don't understand. And that's where our growth takes place. The famous Virginia basketball coach, Tony Bennett, said, if you learn to use adversity the right way, it will buy you a ticket to a place you couldn't have gone any other way. Let's just switch gears for a minute then. And let's talk about one other thing that high performing athletes struggle with a lot. So confidence and self-talk are the ones that we most hear that high performing females struggle with. The only other one that's really common is composure for a lot of athletes, meaning figuring out how to get your mind and body right for the big moments when we're in struggle, or when we're or before a big game, or situations where we're too hyped up. So the question I have for you is, are you somebody who has struggled with composure at all, staying calm, cool, and collected in big moments? And if so, when that has happened, what are your strategies?
Our team focuses a lot on breathing and how we can use breathing to help us either, one, speed up your heart rate and get you more amped, or two, to kind of slow it down and help you focus more and just be more relaxed. So being just aware of your breathing is a really big thing that we do, and I feel like has helped me a lot.
Well, I love that. But you got to follow up with one thing on this, because I've never had an athlete tell us this before, that they use their breathing to actually speed themselves up. Tell us a little bit about what you do to accomplish that.
Yeah. So instead of like deep breaths, it'll be like quick breaths, like almost make yourself hyperventilate, I guess. Or we'll have us do like some jumping jacks, or do some squat jumps, do some burpees, but just get your heart rate up. So whatever you got to do to make that happen.
Well, could you explain to us why you would need to do that? Is that a strategy for maybe when you're playing a bad team and we're worried about sort of being under aroused, in the sense that we're maybe ready to come out flat? Or give us a situation where you need to get kind of more amped up.
Yeah, so it kind of is based off the individual. At least in the bullpen, we have worn heart rate monitors during bullpen sessions, during live settings, and we kind of have found out where like what our heart rate is at when we feel like we're the most locked in the zone, having success. And then the point of the breathing or slowing your heart rate down or getting it up is just kind of to get in that space. So for pitchers, it's where I spend most of my time. And so where I can answer this question the most, I guess, correctly. But if we have a pitcher that usually runs a little low on the heart rate, but she throws really well and is super competitive when it's a little higher, like before she goes out to take the field is when she would get her heart rate going up or do some jumping jacks or burpees. But yeah, and that's how we use it.
That's interesting. That's fascinating to me. And because most athletes struggle with having to come down from the height, but you've given a couple examples where people need to figure out where they perform at their best. And so we always talk about this arousal control dial between 1 and 10, where you kind of need to know you need to be a little bit more hyped up to perform at your best. If so, what do you do about it? Or more often, if you're too hyped up and you function at a 5, best at a 5 out of 10, and you're at 9, you better find a way to bring it down a little bit to be able to perform. Is there any other strategies you can use besides breathing to help you stay calm and composed?
We've been talking a lot about staying in your routine, and your routine is one thing that can be consistent no matter what's going on, no matter who the competition is, whether you're super amped or not amped at all. If you can just develop your routine and then not look at success as how you not looking at success as the outcomes, but based off of how well did you stay in your routine, that can be something that's easily repeatable no matter what the circumstance is. So it's just like I talked about being neutral earlier, it can help you stay in that neutral space.
I love that. We're talking about defining success in that moment, whether we executed the process the right way, even though the outcome might not have been exactly what we wanted in that moment. So Coach Jess, any thoughts?
No, I love everything that you're sharing, Jordy. I mean, you're in the thick of collegiate athletics. You've got goals, and it's just been really great hearing everything and your thoughts on some of these strategies and what helps.
Thanks.
Jordy, anything else that you want to share with us before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. These questions have all been really good.
All right. Well, Jordy, you've been wonderful today. We've seen a sign of vulnerability from you. We've seen the fact that you don't have it all figured out, which is so helpful for people that'll be listening to this podcast, because more importantly, you talked about how you've been working through your struggles, how you have strategies for self-talk, for confidence, for composure, how you use your teammates, how you celebrate your spirituality and your faith to help you be a better person and a better athlete. And you've been real today. So we can't thank you enough. And I really appreciate you being on the Maxed Out Mindset podcast.
Thank you.
Physical abilities such as strength, speed, agility, endurance, and coordination are fundamental in sports. But mental abilities such as focus, concentration, motivation, confidence, resilience, and decision-making can heavily influence an athlete's performance, especially when it matters the most. If you want the mental edge in sport and life, check out the Max Out Mindset for Volleyball book and workbook, or the Max Out Mindset for Softball book and workbook. A guide for coaches, athletes, teams, and parents to help you be in the best position to max out when it matters the most.